Start with Bret Hart.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
Oh, the Hitman.
I think that's a good opener. Legend in the business. I got to meet Bret a bunch of times. I even flew on an airplane with him as I freaked out because the turbulence was so bad and I thought I was going to die. And he kind of laughed at me. Yes, him. Right then and there.
He's the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will
be. He's one of the greatest of all time, and got to meet his brothers and his dad, and at the Terry Funk Amarillo retirement show, we were all there together. And
is that where the turbulence was on the way to that?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure and I don't know how. I guess it was a connection because Bret was sitting right near me. It was me. It was Balls Mahoney was on that flight. There was a bunch of us. Was it Balls? I can't remember. Was Balls at the Terry? Maybe it wasn't Balls. There was
no, 97. I don't think Balls would have been on that show.
Okay, then it wasn't Balls. There was a bunch of us. Maybe I'm thinking of Balls in Japan where he had to pretend he was my husband and tell the stewardess, get my wife. And I was like, no, get out of here. Yeah, but we were all on that show for Terry together. And I think Bret was making fun of me a little bit because I was very scared. The turbulence was unreal. And I thought we were going to die, literally. And he's kind of laughing at me. He'll probably never remember that, but that's okay. I remember it.
Well, that was a hell of a show. So he would definitely remember the show.
Maybe not remember the show. He won't
remember the show, but not the flight.
No, I doubt it. He won't remember the flight. So.
And we've talked about that show in the past, but that's definitely one I would like to go back to at one point. Sure. I don't think we watched the match that you guys had that weekend.
Watch along.
Yeah, I would love to do that. That's one of my favorite shows of that era. I would love to go back and do that at some point.
Sure.
And if anybody's never seen the Bret Hart Terry Funk match from that Terry Funk retirement show, wink, wink.
Yeah, exactly.
I would, if you're a wrestling fan, go back and check that out. But Bret Hart not happy right now when asked about AEW and Jon Moxley, the hardcore matches. Jon Moxley habit of bleeding in a lot of his matches. When asked about it, Bret had a quote that I'm going to pull up here. Sadly, it's getting too phony. I really question the direction that the people that are in charge are taking wrestling. AEW has gone in a bad direction with all the violence and gore. I watched an episode, Dr. Martha Hart doing her big press conference. I'm watching AEW, and Jon Moxley is sticking a fork in somebody's head for 5 minutes with a close-up. This isn't wrestling. I would recommend turning all that off and not watching because it's not very good. Wrestling is going in bad directions because people don't know what wrestling is or was.
Where do I begin? I feel like this is the criticism that ECW got for decades. To this day, we still get criticized. We're the blood and guts company. We're this, we're that, blah, blah, blah. I kind of disagree with Bret, and I'll tell you why. If every single match was like this on AEW television, I'd say, you know what? Yeah, it's too much. Every single match is the same. Everybody's bleeding. But it's not. It's not. You're giving the people a little bit of the hardcore. You're giving people technical wrestling. If there is a good hodgepodge of different genres of people working and ways that people are incorporating different things into the matches, I'm all for that because I think that keeps it fresh. And I also think it differentiates AEW from WWE because you're not seeing that kind of wrestling on a WWE television product or television show. So it makes it different. And there's people who like that hardcore style and who will want to tune into a guy like Jon Moxley or Eddie Kingston, or doesn't Eddie do that kind of thing as well?
Yes, Eddie does a more rough style. I don't know if it's that much of the hardcore style, but it's more different. Of,
different than technical wrestling, different than the lucha libre stuff. I think there's a place for everyone in the sport. I think it makes it unique and different and fun to watch when it's not the same thing over and over again. So, I understand that Bret doesn't like that type of thing, but that's okay because they're not just doing that. There's plenty other matches that are on the AEW card that he probably would tune in and say, wow, these two guys can go. You got the Daniel Bryan or what's his name now? Bryan Danielson, you know, whoever's working at the time, they're not all blood and guts, and ECW wasn't all blood and guts either. And that's what used to piss me off so much, was that they would only see like the Balls Mahoney, Ian Rotten versus the Baldies, and oh my god, that's atrocious. They're bleeding all over the place. This is disgusting. This is has no part in wrestling and blah, blah, blah. Well, what about the other 6-7 matches that were on the card? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Certain people like certain things. You're trying to draw an audience, a wide audience. Some people like this kind of stuff. That's why companies like GCW, CZW, that's why they're out there. They're drawing fans, and people like that kind of thing. So I'm going to disagree with Bret on this. Again, if every single match was blood and guts, I'd say, okay, he's got a point here. But if it's just one match that's like that, I think it's a draw to the program. I think people want to see stuff like that. It's diversity. And I don't want to be near the blood. But watching it from the comfort of my own home, it doesn't really bother me, as long as it makes sense,
right?
Too, because you have to have the storylines make sense. You don't want a guy to just gig to gig. Oh, let's show some blood. I'm just gigging, off of a weak ass chair shot or a weak spot. Make it matter. Make it count, and then it's it's a draw, I believe, to the product.
But they were kind of alluding to the fact that Moxley was just gigging to gig, that the last couple months of his AEW return, like every week, he's just bleeding for the sake of bleeding in every match. Like he gets punched and then he turns around and now he's bleeding, or he's thrown to the outside and he's rammed onto the side of the apron and now he's bleeding. And I think what Bret's talking about and showing the fork thing, that's just become part of his repertoire. And a guy like Bret, who maybe was a part of the belief that AEW was going to be that counter WWE culture, didn't buy into the fact that that included the hardcore style that WWE didn't have.
Again, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And if you don't like it, simply turn off the television or change the channel. That's all. It's not our slogan at one point. It's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Remember that? We had a t-shirt. We had it on our commercials. We had it on our television. It's not for everyone. If you don't like it, watch something else. That's what I say. I think there's a place for that in wrestling. I just feel like if it's done correctly, then I'm a fan of it. Now, if he's just going out there and it's a light tap and he's gigging, make it believable. Do the spot where there's like a huge bump or something that hit him that's, harder than a punch, or just make it believable and the fans will buy into it. Don't just gig for the sake of gigging.
Now we have two other legends commenting here that I'd like to read to you. We'll have one agreeing with Bret and one disagreeing with Bret.
Okay. Well, okay.
The one agreeing with Bret,
Sure.
Jim Cornette on his drive-through podcast agreed with Bret Hart on AEW's use of gore, saying it's so obviously phony and over the top that you can't take it seriously. We'll give you another disagreeing. Wrestling journalist Bill Apter disagreed, commenting on the Wrestle Binge podcast. I want to dwell for a moment on Bret's words about Jon Moxley sticking a fork on somebody's forehead for like 5 minutes and the camera going up. I mean, look at Butcher. Every match was like that, so that's still old school.
So I don't watch any wrestling these days. I watch clips. So I don't want to sound like I'm an expert at AEW matches or anything like that. All I'm saying is I feel like there's a place for it in wrestling. I always have, if you do it the right way. If it's done, not again, you don't want to insult the fans' intelligence. So to have a pillow hit you and gig off it would be moronic. You know what I mean? If it's a big bump or if something comes in the ring that it has the power to bust your skull open and you start bleeding, that stuff is believable. And I don't mind seeing stuff like that in wrestling, you know? I think
Right.
it's a bit much like when they pull out those I don't know, what are they called? The light tubes and start hitting the real
Right.
hardcore stuff. Like that to me, that's barbaric. That's a little too much. And I know there's companies who do that and people dig that, and that's fine. If that's what you're into, that's okay. But I feel like a little one blood match doesn't set the tone for the whole show. There's a lot of talented people on that roster, John Moxley included. He can go. He's a brawler. He's good at what he does. People love him. Bret, not so much, but he's entitled to his opinion. And again, if you don't like what you're watching, change the channel or turn your television set off.
Yeah. I would love to know if Brett had any kind of opinion about ECW back in the day then, because I have to say, in comparison to the stuff that goes on now, the light tubes and the stuff that we've seen evolve post ECW, and granted, I'm going to say this too. I know in Japan, and there were, as Cornette would say, the outlaw mud shows that were going on during ECW that were twice as violent. ECW looks almost tame in comparison, but you've said repeatedly, give us the chance to show you that we're not just the blood and guts. We've got your Eddie Guerrero versus Malenko, your Shanes versus Al Snow, your Lance Storms, and your all these great workers that come through, in addition to the barbed wire mayhem and the balls and axle and all these other types of performers that can give you everything that you want out of an ECW show. I wonder what Brett would have thought about that back in the day.
I don't know, but we had such a good mix of everything. And for the time frame that we were in, the 90s, yes, we were the edgy company. We were the ones thinking out of the box and pushing the envelope. So for that time, that stuff was considered hardcore craziness. As time has gone on, these companies they're just taking it to other levels to try and outdo each other. And like there are some things where I look and I'm just like, oh my God, I would never. Like, I don't even like to watch it because it's too much for me. And maybe people thought that about us and back in the day. But I think as time evolves, you have to come up with new things and be creative. And that's what these guys are doing, with these hardcore matches, and they're trying to outdo each other. And one of these days, God forbid, somebody's going to die from it because it's just, you take it to a point where it's too far just to get a pop,
Right.
just to be the first to do something, which use your brain and think about what you're doing. I think what we did, yeah, some of it might have been a little stupid, but thank God nobody really got hurt, like, super hurt from it. But nowadays, some of these weapons that they're using and things that they're doing, I just like, maybe I'm just old school. I think it's just, like Brett said, it's a little too much. If the whole show is like that, I'm not going to be a fan of that company. But if they did like one or two matches like that, and then, you had the technical wrestlers, you had the high flyer, I'd be a fan of it because it's something different. But I just hope that the guys use their brains and are safe and know what they're doing, because this kind of stuff today in wrestling, it's a bit much, and people are going to say, you sound like a hypocrite for where you came from. No, because if you put us side by side, it's 100% crazier than what we did. We just innovated the different type of matches that could be had because no one else was doing them back then.
Right.
So, it's a different generation.
And maybe you guys had more, like, you guys maybe fell off of stuff a little bit more than this generation does. Maybe that's what we don't see as much. We see viral clips, but you don't see as much on the mainstream shows, the falls, there's
Yeah.
crash pads now. Back in the day, New Jack didn't have no crash pad on
We
the other
didn't
side.
have, I think it was like New York. There were only 1 or 2 states who made us put the pretty blue pads around the ring. Usually we had no padding. So when you would take a bump to the outside, you're landing on concrete. And I've done that several times. It doesn't feel good. And imagine coming off the top rope, landing on your back onto concrete. Not good.
Get you that scoliosis brace back.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's not good. So, in today's world, comparing it to ECW, it's like apples and oranges to me. But I feel like when we did it, it was edgy and it was cool. And it was the outlaw company and everybody wanted to see it. And again, we were more than that blood and guts. We had 1 or 2 matches that were very extreme, but then you had lucha libre, technical wrestling. We had it all. And if there's a mixture of that on your show, I don't see anything wrong with what John's doing. So, I mean, that's my opinion. I think it keeps it fresh. It keeps people interested in the product. So many people are saying about WWE, it's the same thing every single match. Lots of talking, not enough wrestling, and it's the same type of wrestling. And I'm not trying to be a downer on the product because, again, I don't watch it. I just read comments online. So I'm just reading what the fans are writing. You have your diehard WWE against your diehard AEW fans. They're always going to clash. But if you don't have diversity, it's kind of like Groundhog Day every match. So I would give the edge to AEW just because of that reason. Because they're doing something different that WWE is not doing. I like that. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only Moxley stuff probably does stand out because it's a little stiffer and it also has the blood and the mix of that. But I want to point this out too from maybe the historical point of view. Bret was notorious for, and I love Bret, probably in that top 5 all time for me as a fan. Bret is notorious for sneaking the old blade of Rooney across the old forehead to make the match a little bit more meaningful when the color was banned by the Fed because he thought it would add to the story, it would add to the psychology of the match. So that's where I kind of find it a little interesting. But when Bret says it, I listen because that's a guy, when he talks, it means something.
Yeah, I get you. Excuse me. Again, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And Bret Hart sure is. He's a legend in this sport. I'm not arguing that fact. I'm just saying, for me as a fan, if I'm going to sit through 2-3 hours of wrestling these days, I want it to be different and I want it to keep my attention. So if I see somebody bleeding, whether they gig, whether it's hard way, I'm going to be like, ooh, what just happened? But I want it to be believable. I don't want it to be off of some little crappy dunk in the head. I want to see boom. I want to see some, heavy action happening to where that gig makes sense.
And there you go. And that's again where I'll give Bret, whenever Bret did unless it was a hard way, when Bret did gig, it made sense and it was a part of the psychology of the match. So that's where, again, best there is, best there was.
Absolutely. YouTube, it's the Queen of Extreme Francine letting you know that starting April 1st, YouTube will be the home for the Eyes Up Here experience. Along with my co-host Chad, we will be bringing you the best interviews with the hottest stars from wrestling and the entertainment industry. Plus, channel members get access to exclusive video content that includes watch-alongs and much, much more. Subscribe and ring that bell so you get the notifications, and I hope to see you at our next live.